right? You can Marco Polo back and forth, you can WhatsApp, FaceTime, all the ways we can connect, but they're not physically here, right? So when that crisis happens, or when there's a really bad day, oh, wait, who are my people? Who am I going to call?
Welcome to More Than a Milspouse, the podcast for military spouses who want to live with more meaning and less overwhelm. I'm your host, Christine, seasoned military spouse, mom of 3, life coach, and your guide to intentionally designing a life you're excited about as a military spouse. I'm here to help you get the clarity you need so you can get unstuck and unlock your purpose and potential. Because you, my friend, are more than a milspouse. You have something valuable to offer. And when you pursue the things that light your heart on fire, you trade frustration for fulfillment and isolation for a life of impact. It's time to discover who you are meant to be, because together we can change the world. Welcome back to More Than a Milspouse, the podcast for military spouses who want to live with more meaning and less overwhelm. Today we are talking about loneliness and connection, which is so important as we are heading into the holidays and with all of the uncertainty going on in the world. Today's guest is Crystal Bettenhausen-Bu. Did I say that correctly?
Absolutely, you nailed it, yes.
Awesome. Well, I had the privilege of meeting Crystal about a year and a half ago in Washington, D.C., and we immediately connected over our shared love of Hawaii. But as some of you know, this past summer, I had the opportunity to participate in the Military Spouse Leadership Development Program sponsored by the Military Spouse Advocacy Network. And Crystal spoke to our group about her experience in the program and about how she's come to focus a lot of her efforts on understanding loneliness and our need for social connection. And as she was talking about this, I immediately knew this was a conversation we needed to have on the podcast. If you are a longtime listener of the show, then you know at the end of every episode, we talk about the phrase, we are better together. And so today, that's what we're focusing on, why we are better together and why now more than ever we need each other. So first, Crystal, welcome to More Than a Milspouse. We are so honored to have you here. And I would just like to start out by letting you introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Oh, thank you so much. We are so much better together. So I love your quote, and I just am so honored to be here to talk about connection and social health. My name is Crystal Bettenhausen-Bu. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I am also a military spouse. So I've been with my spouse for over 20 years, and he is active duty Navy and has just approached he's over his 30th year. So I haven't been with him for that entire time, but we feel a little seasoned right now. We are the proud parents to 3 amazing daughters. We have a 20-year-old, we have a 9-year-old, and then there's the little middle in an 11-year-old. So we're currently living in Coronado, California, and I am just so excited to talk about my research and my passion for social connection.
Absolutely. Now, before we dig in, I always love to hear people's military spouse origin story. I mean, 20 years with your spouse is a long time, but talk about what it was like coming into that lifestyle. Did you know what you were getting into?
No, I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. I grew up in North Dakota. There was no naval presence in North Dakota, and I didn't have a big background. I have a background of I actually grew up on a 3rd-generation farm, and my family is very civically engaged, but not necessarily within the military. So I had moved to Florida and was living in Jacksonville, Florida, And really, I mean, again, even being in Jacksonville, such a huge fleet concentration area, I was just kind of in my own little world, not even really aware that there was a big naval presence there. And I met my husband through speed dating. He hates his story, so I love any opportunity that I can have to talk about it, because I'm always encouraging people to just put themselves out there to find, find their own connection, and you have to do the work. So we actually met through speed dating, and yeah, it's history since then, I guess. And never would have anticipated where we're at right now. And I have such love for the military, because I don't think I'd be the professional that I am without the journey that I've been on as a military spouse. As much as I've evolved personally, my profession has evolved, and that's from every PCS and every challenge that we've gone through. I wouldn't have learned half the things I've learned, but even when I started dating him, he was in ROTC program, and got in uniform one day a week. So our first duty station was San Diego, where we're here now, and it was very eye-opening.
Well, let me just say, you were the first person I've talked to that said speed dating is how you connected. So I love that. That's a new story for us. And I love that you were willing to just put yourself out there. And also, I just want to highlight what you said about the journey of military life and how that has shaped you and your professional journey and what you're passionate about. Because I think so often we do change in this process, and many times for the better if we lean into that. So, talk about your professional journey and how that's evolved over the years.
Yeah, so I think I started in gerontology, and actually finished my undergrad in gerontology when we lived in Japan. Gerontology, for those who don't know, is the study of aging, more focused on elderly, but I always say, we're aging, and the gerontologist population will say that we're aging from the day we're born, right? So it's the study of the lifespan, really. Came into it really from my own amazing grandparents and connections that I had with my grandparents growing up. The impact of really the loss of my grandparents. So I was studying gerontology. I graduated while we were living in Japan with my undergrad. And then I really wanted to pursue my master's. I wanted to do more in end of life and working with those who are taking care of their loved ones with Alzheimer's disease or any of the other excuse me, uh, dementias, excuse me, and yeah, just kind of fell in love with gerontology, and came across a school in Southern California that was the oldest and largest school of gerontology, the Leonard Davis School of Gerontology at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And we kind of were like exploring how we could make this happen as a couple. My husband had just finished his master's at the Naval Postgraduate School, and I was like, I want to do that too. I want to be able to study and do more. And my husband actually volunteered to go on a GSA, which was kind of the individual augmentation, and globally support the Army in Afghanistan. And we were able to move to Los Angeles so I could go in person, which was I still get little icicles whenever I get to talk about it, because it was just such an important part of my life. And from there, I realized that I wanted to do more clinical work and direct practice versus administrative work. And I walked across campus to sign up for the School of Social Work, not knowing anything about social work and really what a social worker even did. And from there, just finished that journey. Started working for some hospice organizations. We moved to the Middle East. I pivoted a little bit into working with a very large, amazing nonprofit in Bahrain that does amazing work in advocacy and domestic abuse, sexual assault. They're the only helpline in the entire Middle East for women who are in crisis. And I was able to work with them and earn clinical hours, which was so fantastic. And then I was able to get my license in Hawaii during the pandemic. So during that time, I was like, what do I do now? And decided to go back to school for my doctorate, really identifying how isolating it was to be in private practice. During COVID, I pivoted a little bit away from hospice because of the need to be at home with my daughters. During the pandemic, my husband was in Rhode Island that whole year. He actually only spent 34 days with us that year. So I think when you and I connected over Hawaii, I lived in Hawaii that first, 2020, and it was such a roller coaster and so isolating in so many ways because the state had so many restrictions. And then, my spouse was geographically separated from us. So, but then it was also a big year of growth because I was able to pivot into private practice and realized how isolating it was. So my goal really within my doctorate was to really build the field of social work with support because I was seeing so many of my colleagues burning out under so many really challenging circumstances. And from there, kind of stumbled on and stumbled into social isolation and loneliness and the impact. And I think, for me personally, it just was like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been experiencing for so many different duty stations. Really, I think, it's hard not to have a little bit of loneliness when you move somewhere brand new. So, just really sat with me. And then this last couple of years, I've been able to research more on social health and find some amazing researchers that have been really inspiring. So here I am.
I love it. And there's so much to unpack. And where I want to start is just by going back to when you were pursuing your undergrad and then your master's and then coming up with this idea of here's what I want to pursue with my doctorate. Did at any point in there you wonder, like, how is this going to work with military life? Or were you able to just say, let me take the next step and then we'll just figure out the rest later?
Yeah, that's such a good question because my husband actually approached 20 years when we were living in Los Angeles. And part of the goal in my mind with getting a dual degree and making that investment was that he would be approaching retirement. And he came back from Afghanistan, and I think we both had, we had a 8-year-old daughter at the time, and her and I were so lonely. Like we had the dog, we had the cat, we had each other, but we were like, we need more people in our lives. And he said, I want to pursue more leadership. And we were like, okay. And from there, it's been a real interesting ride because, we added 2 more children. I added another degree. He added his 2 leadership tours. Excuse me if you hear the jets flying.
I am totally used to this because after recording on a military base, I'm just like, okay, this is what happens.
Yeah. It's usually in the afternoon. I'm right by Naval Air Station, North Island in Coronado. So
yeah, so let's talk about 2020 and as everyone is going through the pandemic and really feeling this isolation in a way that many people had not felt before. What was that like personally, and how did that inform how you shifted your focus?
I think personally, it was hard. I think when we look at loneliness and we look at factors that impact loneliness, for me, it always goes back into connection and kind of finding a place of belonging. For me in Hawaii, I lived in this amazing historic house on Fort Island, with a rich history of the Pearl Harbor attacks and just so much military history and such an amazing community. And I was so thankful for that. But a lot of my neighbors had their spouses home too. And so that was, that fitting in part wasn't mashing to the same degree. And I think too, working during that time, in which, it was just so much anxiety for so many of our patients and our patients' family members, and trying to, kind of manage all of that, being social takes a lot of effort and energy. I was really fortunate because I had a really great network of military spouses. We'd, go hiking, get up at 4:30 in the morning and go hike. So, we're coming back into the house before the kids are even awake to start their homeschooling. And I think it just, for me, loneliness wasn't just like a feeling, like a mental feeling, right? It was a deep rooted emotional and physical response.
Mm.
Like it really, I can feel loneliness in my stomach, and I can feel that. And I think going through, our hospice team, I love hospice because we're interdisciplinary. So we had, a chaplain, and we have our physicians and nurses, and, being able to connect on different levels professionally and sharing that, like, I'm really lonely, and checking in with our teams, and, just using that language more. And I think that's why, I've come to really appreciate some different terms that we're now able to use, like social health, because there's so much perception that goes into loneliness. Like, well, oh, you're lonely? Well, that must be your fault, right? You're lonely? Well, you're not trying hard enough,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, it's just like grief, it's very individual. We shouldn't have all these like loneliness myths out there. But when we reframe it into working towards something, we say, I'm working on my social health, it sounds a lot different, right? Than, I think, we can say that in so many different options, so many different things, like weight loss, like, oh, I'm trying to get to a magical number on the scale. Okay, well, don't have McDonald's, right? Like, again, there's these perceptions out there. But if we were to say I'm really working on my physical health, then, having well-being and reaching, my health goals, it's totally different. So I think for me, it was also figuring out what language to
Mm-hmm.
use, how to put more of that growth mindset into it, and then really observing other people as well. So, just kind of seeing these common themes, which are, again, going back to belonging, when you're all kind of going through something together, like we did during a pandemic, we can start putting more evidence behind it, right? It's not just me, it's validating.
Yeah. And I think we have also the perception that everybody else has it figured out. Everyone else has those connections, and there's something potentially wrong with me because I feel alone, but I'm supposed to have these connections. And it's hard when you move, and when you move quite frequently, to try to start over, to find those connections, to build those relationships. And so, what are you seeing in your research, and what are you learning about connection?
One of the things that stands out to me, one is the negative health implications from loneliness and social isolation. And I can talk about that later. Two, it's the generation that we're seeing to be the loneliness, where, previously we thought it was those older adults that are homebound, that, or have adult children that are no longer living in the home, that maybe lost spouses, that are dealing with mobility issues. We really thought that that was where we need to focus on social connection, when actually it's our younger adults. So it's our college age kiddos, it's our high schoolers, it's young adults, which, you know, as a military spouse, I think one of the best parts has been the people that we've met, but the mentors that I have met, the spouses that are in different positions, whether it's, a command leadership spouse reaching out, or somebody that's kind of been around a little bit longer, right? More of a seasoned spouse. And that so much of what we experienced during the global pandemic was a lot of programs just kind of shutting down and not coming back up, and the need not being there as much. And we still have young people enlisting, and they're bringing their families, and they're not getting what maybe we got,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that that's just a huge loss, because I can fondly remember standing pierside and having another spouse come up and say, "Hey, how are you?" And I was 9 months into the Navy, and the week after we got married, he went on a deployment. So I knew nothing. I really knew nothing, and I didn't know how to connect. I didn't know that there was, command events. I didn't know that there was really anything outside of our marriage that would support me, because I didn't grow up in the military, so I had no idea. And I think really being able to identify that population in regards to our military and how we can support military families is so critical right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, dare I say that it impacts retention, right? When we feel a place of belonging, we are more connected. We're more willing to engage. We're more willing to come to an invitation for a command holiday party or a family event, right? We're kind of seeing it through a different lens because we feel better about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where that reach goes, that we are better together, of lifting, of building that bridge, of pulling others into a circle of support. But we're not going to do that if we don't feel connected, and it's a ripple effect, and it's quite toxic,
Well, and when you
right?
don't have those connections, when you go through the tough time, when you are struggling, then you don't have someone to turn to and you feel like you're all in it alone. And so having those connections is so crucial when we get to those tough times, because we all go through those seasons that are tough. But I think the challenge that I have seen is, okay, people that have never seen a healthy unit function or having those healthy connections built, it feels like, okay, how do we go about rebuilding all that's been lost?
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that you are catching what I'm throwing, because I've been thinking a lot about it, and I think sometimes my husband being in a couple of leadership roles, has really allowed us to kind of maybe experiment with that. How do you reach into and increase that engagement, and pass on kind of wisdom and nuggets of like, hey, did you know XYZ? Or and we have so much on social media, which is great, but within that positive information there's always negative information. And again, if we go back to that target population of those younger adults, they're the most connected generation ever, right? But they're still feeling lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we get into social isolation versus loneliness. You can be in a marriage and be socially out there and have a social partner, so to speak, and still have loneliness, right? And they kind of go back and forth. They kind of, hang out together. I say they make salsa, right? So it's like, they all work together, and then perception comes in, and perception just is, he's like the cool kid throwing parties, and it's not good, because once you start perceiving, that cycle just goes right back. It just loops right back in. Now I'm perceiving XYZ. Now I'm going to socially isolate a little bit more, and now I'm lonely. And that it's not just spouses,
Mm-hmm.
it's active duty as well. If they're not fitting into a command, if they're not finding a place of belonging in a new duty station. And I see that a lot, just within my work as a military one source provider, being able to ask a client to take a loneliness inventory and a scale, and having them take that opportunity to identify what they maybe don't have right now is really eye-opening, when we get to say, oh my gosh, look, lonely. Are you lonely? And like these aha moments of, young service members saying, I never thought about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. When I think about healthy commands and what worked when we were younger, and also what worked when we were OCONUS, which if you've lived OCONUS, you probably know that networks are stronger
They are.
for whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason, right? And then I get back into San Diego, and I'm like, why don't we have XYZ? Why don't we see anybody or go anywhere? And it's like, well, it's spread out, it's big, it's, and there's other things that we can occupy our time and energy with. But it goes back to formalities, to be quite honest. The name tag, the power of a name tag, right? In being able to connect people. The power of a host, whether it's the spouse organization, their leadership team, whether it's, the command team, whoever it is, getting out there and introducing themselves to every single person in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I remember our leadership from one of our very first ships overseas. And they nailed it. They had they made gathering into an art, So when I see some of these books, like, The Art of Gathering, I'm like, there's so many military spouses that just were naturally doing that. I don't know if they picked it up in training. I don't know, but they
Mm-hmm.
did it so well, and they made everybody feel important and belonging, like a place of belonging, right? And when we don't have those formalities, because, and I think I hear a lot of, well, we don't want it to be that formal. We want it to be more casual. You risk a clique just growing
Mm-hmm.
and engaging without intentfully touching everybody in the room. And it's, again, a very unintentional thing that happens, but it's very interesting to watch in any group, to see how little groups can be formed in a bigger group setting. And if that group isn't broken apart, everybody gets really comfortable in that group. And the people that aren't in that group are not going to be the people that come back to any event.
Right.
And the people that are in that group aren't going to realize that all those people are out of that group feeling awkward and feeling unwelcome and, trying to fit in and not having that opportunity, and I think, again, this is a skill set. Socializing is a skill set, right? But when we don't get an opportunity to practice and we haven't been able to practice for so long, things start getting lost very unintentionally,
Mm-hmm.
because the intent still is to be social. But if we aren't doing it intentfully, we lose out on an opportunity to formally get to know somebody and bring them in and see them, shake their hand, look them in the eye, introduce yourself, learn something about them, and then if we don't have that, we're going to lose them.
Well, and the less opportunities there are to connect with others, the more we get out of practice, out of the habit of how do you engage? How do you bring somebody new in? How do you make them feel welcome? Answer the questions. Because sometimes when you've been a military spouse for several years, you just assume that everybody knows what you know. And there's a lot of information that isn't passed along and that gets lost. And so I
Yeah.
think, there is the challenge that many of us, especially if we're in the season of life with kids, life can get busy very easily. And we feel like we don't have the time, but we can still feel lonely in that busy season.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think that's where it kind of comes back to that intent. And if we look at that younger generation, why are they feeling lonely? Dare we say it's electronics, right? Social
Mm-hmm.
media. They're very, very connected. And the moment we feel uncomfortable, what do?
We pick up our phone.
We pick up our phone
Mm-hmm.
and we detach, right? We detach, we dissociate from what's going on. And I think, being out and social is uncomfortable. When we're uncomfortable, we dissociate into something that feels comfortable. Oh, let me look at my friend's kitten videos, right? And we're missing out those opportunities for tiny little micro movements of socialization. And I think I get that busy thing, um, and it is absolutely exhausting for whatever reason to parent now versus pre-pandemic, right? It could be kids are getting older, or things are getting more active, or our attention's being pulled in other ways. We just really miss some of that downtime. Who knows what it is, but I think it goes back to that intent, and how we need to kind of engage and start forming those relationships, because we now have technology that can keep us connected to all of our really great friends from that overseas duty station, right? You can Marco Polo back and forth. you can WhatsApp, FaceTime, all the ways we can connect, but they're not physically here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when that crisis happens, or when there's a really bad day, oh, wait, who are my people? Who am I going to call? Right? And again, I think it was through my own observations, and I'm really transparent and vulnerable about my own loneliness. And I think some of the things too was coming out of that pandemic, things were done differently. We didn't invite people over to the house as much. We didn't have dinners. We weren't gathering in public places. And then you're kind of in your routine, and you're going, trying to be normal, and some of those normal things aren't happening, and we perceive that it's us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we make it kind of our problem. So, are we going to go talk to a bunch of people and say, I'm not fitting in here. I'm lonely. I'm very much grieving my own routines and the people that I knew and the people that knew me. But, it goes back to kind of the 5-3-1 rule of social health, with really identifying those three people that are in relationships in which you're reciprocating back and forth, right? And you're engaged. When we didn't have as much technology, we kind of had to do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? We had to find somebody at the park. Again, the random occurrences that took place in my life that have led to, my very best friends, right? And if we're staring at our phone, we're not going to have that opportunity. And what I love about social health and this season in my doctoral program is that I'm constantly experimenting, even with my family. So a couple weeks ago, I told my husband, we're just going to sit at the coffee bean and we're just going to hang for a minute. And we're not going to be on our phones. And a gentleman just started talking to us. And, you start talking, and I was just watching how this gentleman was engaging with my husband. And I was like, they both needed this, they both needed that back and forth dialogue that's real, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a Marco Polo video back and forth beach balling. It is a real conversation that you're engaging with somebody, and just how important that is. And we are busy, but we have to be intentful. So I schedule, I love Fountain Diet Coke. So I schedule Diet Coke breaks and just meet friends for happy hour. And I would love to be able to do it 3 hours a week, right? I'm at like maybe once every other week, but it's kind of finding and identifying what's going to work. That in itself is exhausting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, we should get together for lunch. And then you finally get something done, and then somebody's kids get sick and you're canceling, but I think it's making that intent happen, and the importance of it being equal in the attempts, right?
Yeah.
And just also giving some grace to feel that grief and that loss.
Mm-hmm.
But also the importance of moving forward and making that network. We have our 9-year-old has epilepsy, when she was having more seizures, and I'm going, oh my gosh, why am I not calling anyone? And why am I not reaching out? And it had nothing to do with the people in my network. It had to do with my own feelings of not feeling a place of belonging, right?
Mm-hmm.
And why is that? Well, I've just been so busy. I haven't reached out. I'm not doing my normal things, and I felt that distance. And, I realized I have to put time into these relationships that I want to have. And sometimes it's putting ourselves out there, like speed dating, do some friend dating, right?
Yeah. I want to go back to what you said earlier about the negative health implications of loneliness. And the US Surgeon General has even called loneliness, isolation, and a lack of connection a public health crisis in the US. So help us understand what some of these negative implications are. And then I want to talk about some things that we can do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So research, and we've been studying social health, loneliness, social isolation since like the late 1970s. Even before that, Harvard did some like studies regarding being social. But what we're seeing, and the one that sticks out the most to me, is loneliness is as detrimental to your health as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day.
Hmm.
I don't know a whole lot of people that are smoking anymore, and it's because of the negative health implications. We're looking at an increase of Alzheimer's or dementia up to almost 50% for having loneliness, right?
Oh.
Increase in cardiovascular diseases. Um, it's it is now something we can say is negative on your health. And yes, the Attorney General has declared it a public health emergency. There's been some different language. I love the one of friendship recession. I think in the political climate, with even the global pandemic, differences of opinions have caused a lot of challenges within friendships, relationships. People kind of worried about what their affiliation or what their beliefs are and how they're going to fall has caused some social isolation as well. And, just challenge with finding friends. So poor social health is definitely something that is linked to a lot of health issues. And we're able to now say, just like physical health and just like mental health, that we're able to do some things that we can prevent. I always like to talk about physical health. We all know 30 minutes of moderate exercise can help with our cardiovascular health. We know sleeping for 8 hours a day. My favorite from the VA in Palo Alto is 4 self-care activities a day help reduce cortisol levels for those who are caregiving. Anyone that's in that caregiving role and taking care of someone, anyone taking care of people or older adults, 4 things that you enjoy are reducing your cortisol levels. That's pretty significant, right? That we can quantify it. But social health, we're looking at the 5-3-1 rule. So, and this is hard. By no means is this easy. I always say it's not like turning on a light switch when you walk in a room. It's not that simple. But I think being able to have something that you reach for, like the 5-3-1 rule, is helpful to start. So 5 is kind of those interactions. You're having 5 interactions a week. I think a lot of people are going to be like, well, what about my spouse? What about my children? I think that depends, of course, on your relationship with them, but everyone needs a break, right, from your immediate family. And that interaction can be, sitting next to someone in, at a place of worship, maybe having a conversation with somebody, the cashier at the grocery store, instead of going through self-checkout and getting really frustrated because your bags are outweighing or you're not bagging right. Just pick the cashier that's a live person and have a conversation. How's the weather? Talk about plastic bags, anything that will kind of engage you. So 5, we're needing 5 of those, right? Volunteering at your kid's school, going out of your car at school pickup. That can be huge. You never know who you're going to stand next to. And, be comfortable with a smile or just making a comment. I'm usually the one at school pickup making really sarcastic comments, but, and that has, brought me some great friends. And then we move into 3, and 3 is hard too. So 3 is those 3 meaningful relationships. We say those are the 3 people you have pinned at the top of your phone, right, to message quickly, right? Those are the people that you're going to call in that emergency. Those are the people you're going to call and say, I'm having a really hard mental health day. They're kind of your ride or die. Those relationships are so essential. And what's essential about them is that, again, you're both invested. And again, these are by no means, friendship is hard to navigate. It's hard to navigate as a young child. It's hard to navigate as a middle-aged person. And I will tell you, working with older adults, it's hard to navigate in nursing homes. It is not something that will ever go away. Navigating friendships is challenging, right? So, being able to, be honest, be able to extend yourself, find things that you enjoy doing. Chances are, if you love volunteering at your kid's school, you're going to find somebody that's like-minded that also loves volunteering at your kid's school, right? I love plants and gardening. So, a gardening group is always my go-to. Where can I find kind of a gardening group? And then 1 comes down to, 1 hour a day of social activity. It doesn't have to be one chunk. Again, we're all busy, but it's looking for those interactions that you're having that kind of equal a 60-minute period of time, whether that's, again, talking to, a neighbor, bus stop, making a couple phone calls, sending some text messages. Again, real life is always going to be the number one way to feel better, but we understand also that we have technology and we can use technology for some great things too. Texting someone a funny TikTok, or checking in, or dare I say, even calling someone on the phone.
The lost art.
We don't do that anymore, right? It's a lost art of like having your phone ring, and yes, you run the risk that they might not answer or to go to voicemail, but you know, you never know. So, taking that chance to be a little vulnerable, because it can be really helpful to just have an actual conversation without saying, hey, can we talk for a minute? And then getting a response saying, well, I'm doing XYZ and I can't do this and I can't do that. And 5 months go by and you still haven't connected. Um, it's taking those risks. So 5-3-1, that is the key to social health.
Okay, so with the three, does it matter if it's people that you are physically close to, or is it just about having those three close friendships?
So it doesn't. But I think for military spouses, it's important to have that geographic zip code, right? So to speak. And you could have maybe your three distant friends and then have another three that are there, because I mean it really does make a difference, to hug somebody that knows you, that sees you, that cares about you, and that's invested in you. And we're so busy we can't hardly see people on a weekly basis. So those long distance friends, we're lucky if we're able to connect with every other year on a girls trip, or happen to be in the same place and time every 5-10 years. So it's becoming harder and harder. So I think shooting for that three in the area that you live is helpful for military spouses, because we don't have much time and we're running into circumstances in which we are going to need help. I love a good meal train, right? But if you don't have any contacts within your zip code and somebody puts together a meal train, and I've had this, hey, can I put together a meal train? And the spouse is like, I don't know anyone here, and it's like, okay, can we talk about this? We need to start somewhere, and we are stronger together. And when we're able to get a lemon from a neighbor because we feel more comfortable reaching out and text, and we're getting to know people, it's just going to build stronger communities. So it does need to kind of start with boots on the ground in close proximity, so that we can make it achievable. It's just only going to be beneficial.
Okay, so I know you mentioned shared interests and that being a great way to connect with people. Do you have any other suggestions for moving to a new area, trying to find those people who are willing to mutually invest in a relationship?
Yeah, I think amongst the military population, sometimes we get tunnel vision and we think we're kind of in these silos of this is how it's done. We just talked about everything's different now, right? So we need to kind of change our approaches. It's not just the spouse clubs anymore, right? For the most part, there's bigger, larger communities, and that sense of belonging in a community is so important. And that's not just your military or command community, that's a greater community. So, volunteering, number one, great way. And studies are showing our numbers are down in volunteering. People are not volunteering anymore. I think again that goes to, well, I have social media. I don't need to volunteer because I can get everything I need in my house, but you can't, right? Civic groups, joining things like the Rotary. You become a Rotary member, and everywhere you move, you're going to be able to become a Rotary member, right? Like you can transfer. These are things in which you can engage with other generations, which can be so powerful, and being able to, have friends and contacts and supports that are of different ages than you. So that's always my number one thing. I think just being out and about. I did a little self-study in January and just started sitting on the park bench in front of Starbucks every Monday. So I'd have my Starbucks, but I wouldn't be on my phone. I'd just sit and have some like radical awareness of I'm here and present. And then I'd walk down and buy flowers and come back and I'm like, why am I feeling so much different? It's because I engaged with so many people. Um, so one thing that I did in Los Angeles, because I was not connected to any military branch or community because we were, just kind of civilians, I looked for different opportunities like meetup.com. There was an organization called Girlfriend Circle, and it's actually still going.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to meet a lot of young professionals that were interested in theater or going to see a band. We do different like coffee tasting. It's actually called cupping experiments at different trendy little coffee shops. And I was able to meet people, again, within my zip code that had similar interests in just going out and exploring. Spouse clubs are great. And I do think that they are really meaningful. But if you go and you're not feeling that connection, that's okay too, right? And sometimes it takes a little bit of time. Some of my best friends from when we lived in Monterey were found through going to a spouse club, and it wasn't the right fit for all of us. And we talked about that at the table, and then we formed, monthly dinners, and we'd go out. So I think it's also, stepping into a leadership role. And hey, if there's one or two people that you're really liking and you're connecting with, connect them to each other. One of the things I love the most, second to the people I meet, is getting to introduce people that I meet to each other. And I get a little jealous when I hear that they're having lunch together in Rhode Island or that they're all hanging out in Japan. But it's like such an amazing gift to be able to see your friends become friends with other people that you've introduced them to, and I think that is part of the power of our network as well. When we see somebody, and I don't know if you're seeing it, I'm seeing it here in San Diego. I'm seeing it in my community Facebook groups, especially somebody's posting saying, I've lived here for a year and I don't know anyone. And I haven't connected with anyone, or I've tried X, Y, Z. I think when we look at some of the spouse clubs, we have to also realize that they're run by volunteers and they're not going to maybe be able to email you back within the first hour that you sent in your membership, right? So being patient, having some grace, putting yourself out there, realizing that a lot of the things that you might be feeling are completely normal, but that perception is just waiting to like get its claws into you. To start with some negative self-talk and convince you to not put yourself out there, right?
And when you are thinking that, there are others that are also thinking and feeling the same way. And when we're all there together, struggling with our own insecurities and our sense of, I don't know if I fit here, just know that you're probably not the only one that is dealing with that. And so there's so much that we can do for ourselves, but as you pointed out, just connecting somebody to someone else and what we do for others, that really matters and it makes a difference. And even if it's not the right fit for you, you might have introduced someone that is now has a new best friend because of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's what we're finding. You mentioned taking care of yourself. When we put social health, physical health, and mental health together, that is when we are going to reach our point of well-being, and be able to handle stress a little bit better, be able to handle the ups and downs, the roller coasters of military life, being able to, just show up in spaces and show up for our kids and our service members and just be better human beings because we invested in ourselves.
And that's so much of what ultimately leads us to a fulfilling life. Because if we have a sense of purpose, but we're not taking care of ourselves, we're going to burn out. And if we're taking care of ourselves, but we don't have that connection, something's going to feel like it's missing from our lives. And we really need all of these pieces. But when we put those pieces together, we're able to take that frustration and turn it into a fulfilling life that fills us up and allows us to make a positive impact in the lives of others. So, Crystal, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Would you just let everybody know how they can connect with you if they have more questions?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. And I mean, I feel like we didn't even get to half the thing. So more conversations hopefully to come. But right now, you can reach me through my nonprofit. It's called Strength in Service, and you can reach out to support@strengthinservice.org. We are in our startup phase as a nonprofit. So we are on social media and working on getting all that going. So you'll see some more content as we approach kind of our kickoff for our presence, which will be on Giving Tuesday Military.
Fantastic. I know we didn't really get into all of that, so we'll have to have you back on and talk more about that. But thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come have this conversation, because I think it's something that is really needed, and you are really out there making a difference in the lives of so many, especially military families. So thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you for having me.
Friends, I hope this episode was meaningful to you. Loneliness is a problem in the U.S. and for military families. And this time of year can be really tough. A lot of us don't get to be together with family for the holidays. We don't have anyone to go home to. What happens so often is that we end up scrolling on social media, seeing images of families and friends together, and thinking that we're the only one that feels alone. But that's simply not true. So what can we do about it? We can make sure we are taking care of our well-being. We can go out and meet people, and we can intentionally connect others to each other. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference. If this episode resonated with you, please go share it with someone else in your life. Maybe it will help open up a dialogue, because we need to have more conversations about loneliness, how it impacts us, and what we can do to improve our social health. I hope you have the best week available to you. Until next time, may you live filled, fueled, and full of joy. Hey, Amazing MilSpouse, before you go, I want you to know that I love hearing from you. The More Than a MilSpouse community exists to help you thrive as a military spouse. Figure out what lights your heart on fire and empower you to live with purpose and impact. You can have an incredible impact simply by heading over to iTunes to subscribe and leave a review. But your impact doesn't stop there. You can empower those around you simply by sharing an episode with a friend or neighbor, someone who needs a little encouragement in this military life. And if this episode was meaningful to you, spread the love by taking a screenshot of this episode and tagging me on Instagram so we can continue to reach more people, change more lives, and shift the way that military spouses look at life. Because we are better together, and together we can change the world. Let's do it.